Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment, for the Sony ZV-1 Mark II. Now, this retails for a little under $900 US. Of course, it is the update to the original ZV-1, and it is really aimed at anyone who wants to do any vlogging, really have just a compact point and shoot that can do a little bit of everything. Now, the key improvement here with this model for 2023, and I am glad that they finally updated it, is that we do now have something that is definitely more ideal to use as a vlogging tool. So if you plan on getting the Sony grip or a third-party grip like the one from Small Rig, which is also a really good alternative, much more affordable and a little bit more modular, then this camera is going to make you happy. And I say that because unlike Gen 1, which had a much longer lens, 24 to 70 mil, here you have 18 to 50, which means that vlogging is much easier when you're using a handheld grip. You will actually be able to frame yourself properly without trying to turn into Stretch Armstrong. So that in itself is a reason to consider the ZV-1 Mark II if you are after the best compact vlogging camera on the market. Now, on the other hand, if you are looking for more of a hybrid experience, maybe one where the camera is going to do a better job with still images than just a video camera, that's when I would tell you that I think the ZV-1, the original, is a better option, and I'll explain why. Now, the lens that's in this, 24 to 70 mil, but it's faster. It's essentially, the wall that the new ZV-1 Mark II hits is that new 18 to 50, you won't find that in any other compact point and shoot on the planet, but it comes at the expense of being a slower piece of glass. So f4 is the wall you're going to hit with this, f2.8 is the wall you'll hit with the older, less expensive ZV-1. But that doesn't mean that's the only difference. I mention this because the faster glass here and longer range, I think, equates to a better tool for traditional photography. And it's obvious the reason Sony incorporated it into the first gen model was, well, they weren't ready to make a brand new lens for this camera. So we got what was commonly found in the the RX 100 line, which appears to be discontinued, even though Sony hasn't officially weighed in on that. This camera, as a second-gen product, got the benefit of getting a lens that's clearly much more practical for vlogging, less practical for still photography, in my opinion. Okay, some of you are going to be very happy with the 18 to 50 for still photography. I like to have a little more telephoto capability. But again, these are both vlogging cameras, so telephoto capability is really not high on the checklist. But as I said, if you're looking for something that can really do double duty and not just be a vlogging, video machine, the ZV-1 is the better choice. It's less expensive, and for all intents and purposes, image quality, overall capability is nearly identical. So what does this have other than, of course, that 18 to 50 mil lens? Well, it has a fully functional touchscreen now for the entire menu system, everything. And that is in itself a really good reason to consider this camera over the ZV-1 because you have to remember Sony is marketing this towards regular users. This is not meant to be a pro tool. It doesn't have an audio jack for monitoring. It is really designed to be a point-and-shoot camera with vlogging at its center, and that's exactly what this is. The original ZV-1, a little bit more of just an RX 100 that vlogs, and that's my best way of putting it. This now is really maybe what the ZV-1 should have been at launch, and when you jump into the menu system, you are greeted with a fully touch-capable experience, something you don't have on the ZV-1. A missed opportunity. That's another reason that I'm going to say I think this is what this camera needed to be in Gen 1. And that's not to say I don't like what we ended up with. When it comes to 10 versus 8-bit capability, you do not have 10-bit capability with this camera. Sony does deliver different creative looks, profiles, of course the fully articulating display, identical to what we had here. But again, the fact that now you have touchscreen makes a big difference. As I mentioned in my first look, Sony made another important adjustment, which was bringing the quarter 20 mount for tripod use over to the other side of the camera rather than being part of the battery bay. This was a major flaw on this camera. It meant that you really, had to dismount this in order to drop a new battery in, replace an SD card, and that was highly impractical. So from a usability standpoint, this was a very big upgrade, as minimal as it might seem. We are still using the same battery type, which, there's nothing wrong with the BX1, but Sony, it is time for a refresh. I mean, you've been riding that BX1 for like 10 years. It's time to give us a better battery in these compact cameras. But I can't help but suspect the reason Sony's not giving us a better battery is because they don't even know how long they're going to continue to make point-and-shoot cameras. And I feel that way because obviously the RX100 line, as I mentioned, seems to be gone. And these cameras, well, they're functional, but they're really not that enticing. And I say that because while you will not find anything that really is as good as this camera on the market right now in 2023, at its price point, that's a point-and-shoot package like this, you are much better suited investing that same amount of cash that you threw into this into something like the ZV-E10, which of course is older. It launched at the same time as the ZV-1, but it's better at literally everything. Now, what is it not better at? Maybe being as simple to use because it is an interchangeable lens camera, which means, if you're not going to leave, let's say, the kit lens on it permanently and you're going to buy glass for it, that's going to become expensive. And I think it intimidates people, but it really shouldn't, because at its core, this really is a ZV-1 with an APS-C sensor and the flexibility to put any glass you want on it. And right now, if you buy it with its pancake kit lens, it's actually less expensive than this camera. And again, much better overall. So if you're talking about best performance at the price point, I'm handing that to the ZV-E10. It's much more flexible, and even when I travel, as much as I like this little guy, I have found plenty of instances where, because it wasn't wide enough, or it wasn't long enough, or it just wasn't high enough quality for my tastes, I found myself using the E10 rather than the 1. So I think that should be your primary point of comparison, because here the comparison is strong. The cameras aren't that different. Again, the main difference really is in this new lens. But part of what I didn't mention is that even though we got this new lens, there's no stabilization in the camera, only electronic. Here we actually had in-body stabilization, which means that we have better overall stability coming out of the video on this camera than this camera. And that's really disappointing. I think that, Sony obviously made a choice here, and I'm assuming it was a cost-cutting measure or something with engineering. Whatever it wasn't a great choice. So what this means is that if you turn on that electronic stabilization, which you're going to need unless you're putting this on a gimbal or it's on a tripod stationary, that 18 millimeter wide angle lens all of the sudden turns into closer to the starting point on the original ZV-1. And this is part of, the issue with recommending this camera over the older ZV-1. Now, it does have all the nuanced difference of a more modern camera. One of the other big things, and this is not something to scoff at, is that we actually have a Type-C port. And while you may be saying to yourself, that doesn't seem like a big deal, well, the ZV-1 does not. Here, you will need to, bring along good old micro USB for charging, which is deplorable. That should never have made it to this camera, even back in 2020. And unfortunately, the ZV-E10 shares the exact same issue. So if you want to shy away from having to bring another cable with you for charging purposes, transferring purposes, even though I personally don't charge any of my batteries for cameras in body, I always do it off on a dedicated external charger, still having that convenience is not a great thing. Let's talk about webcam capability, because with the ZV-1, you had to actually install software on your system in order for it to work. The ZV-1 Mark II, on the other hand, is totally prepared. Just connect this to any laptop. I'm not talking about Mac. I can't vouch for that. You're in your own world there. But once you connect it, your PC will instantly recognize it as a webcam, and it will operate as a 720p webcam. So good functionality, better turnkey performance, plug-and-play performance, than, of course, the lack of that in the older ZV-1. Another thing that you should know is that this camera does have AI capability, and that is a clear advantage over the ZV-1. It means it's going to do better with its autofocus, even though its contrast phase hybrid system only covers 65% of its 1-inch 20-megapixel sensor. And by the way, that's the same sensor system from the RX 100 Mark VII, which is a really good thing. It means even though it's 4 years old, very good still in video performance, as you would expect. After all, this camera is very expensive for what it is. Which, again, is a point-and-shoot in a world where point-and-shoot has sort of been buried, even by Sony, who was the last bastion of point-and-shoot cameras. Hopefully we still get another RX 100. I hope. It doesn't look good, though. So AI here, when it comes to face detection, overall subject detection, does make a vast improvement in tracking, and also the decisions the camera's going to make on priority when another person comes in to frame. So these are things you just don't physically have. It's a hardware limitation of the older ZV-1. So another thing that should come into your comparison. And if you're wondering why I've got this on here, well, it's the whole reason that this lens got wider, because so many of us were putting wide-angle adapters on the original ZV-1. So that may be enough right there for you to just disqualify this. And even though I brought in the E10 before and said, for the money, the E10 is a better camera, the E10 is much bigger, not pocketable, and, may not even be something you want to bring on a trip or in a bag, although I would still argue that with the right pancake lens, this thing is really close to making weight. So if you can jump to the E10, I would go that route. But if you can't, you already know really everything you need to about these two cameras. You're going to save some money with the first-gen ZV, spend a little bit more here, but get a wide breadth of, I think, nice features that should have been there again in Gen 1, like the touchscreen, like the wider angle lens, the AI, that I can't say should have been there because back in 2020, AI wasn't a thing in cameras yet, or in many conversations like it is today. And then another thing, I'm not impressed by the creative looks that they've thrown on. Those exist here too. They've tweaked a little bit. But the touchscreen capability of this and having a Type-C port, again, make it feel like it's something that came from 2023 rather than, maybe 5-6 years ago. And that's how this camera felt at launch, in my opinion. So again, the idiot-proof vlogging camera that this tries to be, it is. But remember, even though you're getting that wider angle lens here, which is a game-changing feature, at least it appears to be, you will need to have that on a gimbal or, again, some form of stationary object in order to ensure that you are getting the full 18 mil. Whereas on this, of course, that's just not, it's not going to happen. You're going to be starting at 24, and then if you apply any form of stabilization, there's going to be a crop factor, not as heavy as the electronic here, which is 1.5 times right out the gate. And that's why I keep mentioning that if the idea was to deliver that perfect lens that should have been on this first model, we kind of got that, but not completely. And that's why it can't be the only reason, in my opinion, that you grab the Mark II. It has to be the entire package of the touchscreen, as well as the quarter 20 being moved to where it should have been originally, getting that Type-C port. These are all things that the Gen 1 should have been, and well, now we get it in Gen 2, and it's more expensive, and we no longer have, lens or in-body stabilization, which to me is a big drawback. But hey, in real-world use, if you're only going to use this for vlogging at the widest angle, you're probably going to still be best served by the latest and greatest Mark II, and that's what I recommend. If, again, you're looking for something that's a little bit more of a hybrid that can be a better still camera, I think you're going to be better served by the lens and stabilization that the ZV-1 has to offer. And then if you're looking for, obviously, what is the best investment rather than just the best small form factor vlogging tool or camera, that is going to be the ZV-E10. It's older, but with that APS-C sensor, you have the ability to make this as small as you want. You'll still get better video quality, better still quality, better everything, but it still has a micro USB port for charging. So take that with a grain of salt. And, you know, let's not forget that this is still unmatched in the marketplace. If you look to Canon, they don't really have anything to match it, and no one really does. And no one has an 18 to 50 mil lens in a compact point and shoot with a 1-inch sensor. So that may be all it takes to bring you over for it. I think that this camera makes a lot of sense, again, for people shooting just video and wanting to capture themselves. But if you want to do anything else, these two may still be a better option, as I've stated through the course of this full review. So I do like it. I personally don't think I will be purchasing one since I own both of these. So I don't really see a great reason to bring this into the mix. I would be better suited spending a lot more money and getting the ZV-E1, the full frame option. But again, I have no reason to get that either with the FX3 that I'm filming on right now. But this is still a good camera, certainly for both still and video. Built-in ND filter, I didn't mention that, which, you know, is one of the hallmarks of course, the ZV-1. We do not have that here, of course, in the interchangeable mirrorless ZV-E10, but you will have that here. Also, macro capability on this is pretty solid. It has a really close focusing distance, 5 centimeters, I believe, with at its widest point, 18 mil. So that's really nice to have. It's also got pretty close focusing at the 50, the longest point of the range on this camera. But again, slower glass, no stabilization, higher price point. I'm not exactly sure everybody's running out to buy this. So I'm curious what all of you think. You got my impressions. I think it makes sense if you absolutely must have that 18 mil. But if you didn't need the 18 mil at the expense of the things I've mentioned and a literal increased price point, these are probably going to serve you better. But I want to hear from all of you. Where's your head right now with regards to the ZV-1 Mark II? Too expensive? The improvements don't outweigh the corners that have been cut, so to speak? I'm curious to find out. But I still think you'll be happy with this camera or, of course, either of these two. But remember, you know, it's really a matter of what you plan on doing with it and understanding the limitations of the respective camera in question. Any comments or questions, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe and please stay safe. Later.